Good morning, and thank you guys for coming. Before we get started, there were just a couple things I wanted to talk about. Chris was talking yesterday about how many different people we saw this week that was pretty amazing. Like, man, Chuck used to drive in the yard and sit down and talk for an hour, or he'd call me every month or every week or every day. Grandpa always said, "You don't take the time, you make the time," and he always did that. He, first call every day, last call every night, and I know it meant a lot to a lot of people here. So, what a great lesson to all of us on how you can impact the people around you and how many people you can impact around you. If you don't take the time, you make the time. Grandpa would always say, he'd have this smirk in his face, this little twinkle in his eye. He'd say that the good Lord always looks out for his favorites. I always got a kick out of that. And, I know the last 4 or 5 years, he had some health issues and every excuse to kind of be down in the dumps, but he never was. He's always upbeat, always very positive, and always doing work that was fulfilling to him, always helping others, always lifting others up, always making those calls. But I think the good Lord did look out for one of his favorites, and Grandpa got his wish. He went out with his boots on. About 2 weeks ago, we were making hay. He's been doing really well. He was feeling great. We baled about, 697 bales of hay or something, that big square bales. So I went by the farm about 8 o'clock that morning, and he was out tedding hay. Later that afternoon, he switched from driving tractor. He jumped in a semi. He hadn't driven a semi for a little while, so that was pretty cool to see. And finally, I think it was 11:30 at night, I kicked him out of the truck, and I said, "Grandpa, go get some rest, I know you're tired." It was 11:30 at night. We went until about 2:30 that morning before we finished up, and he called me every half hour. So wouldn't leave me alone, so that was pretty cool. So anyway, he, even the last day, the day he passed that morning, I was down at the farm and driving through the yard, and he was carrying water buckets, watering flowers. Just amazing. So just always helping. We came up to the office then, brought up some credit card statements. "Hey, do you need these statements?" "No, we got those taken care of. Throw them away." He's always in and out of the yard 5, 10, 15, 30 times a day, and always calling, and just went up to get some rest and take a nap in his favorite chair like he always did. And Grandma called us, and he was feeling really good. He sounded really good that day. And he'd been on a good run. He wasn't walking with a cane. He climbed up in and out of that semi just better than I would. So he did great. And Grandma called and said, "Grandpa's not answering me." So Jeff and I ran up to the house, and he just took a nap. Didn't even uncross his legs. He was just laid back in his couch. Like any of us that ever walked up those stairs to the house, to see him napping in that chair where he's always napping, that's where he went. So he would have been super pumped to know that's how he went out. So as strange as it always was for us grandkids, he really looked forward to this day. He's been working on his funeral for I don't know how long. So we, Christmases and Thanksgiving, whenever the whole family was home, he'd always need 13 minutes, or I need 6 minutes of your time, and we'd get together and go through any revisions. So each year. So he, this was really an important day for him. He had these, from the stories he wanted told to the diagrams. He diagrammed out where he wanted the flowers placed, which flag was where. We've got a diagram as to where everybody stands when they come in. We each have a folder, and I don't know if I can call it a folder, but there's about 50 tabs in here, all neatly organized, and He'd put a lot of time and had a lot of pride in this. And if you haven't seen it, feel free to let me know. I'd be happy to share it. Grandpa had these stories he'd tell us over and over and over. Grandpa was always, I don't know if it was from dog training or what, but he was very repetitive when he wanted to get something in your head. He'd tell you over and over and over. And I think, those were the stories that he felt really shaped him and made him the guy he was. So I think his hope was like to just drive that over and over and over and over into all of us. So we're going to read a few of those stories today. I know each grandkid picked one of those stories to share. There's a lot more, and they're awesome. If anybody wants a copy, give me a couple weeks, and we'll be able to email them out. They're pretty cool. With that, I'm going to get back to the script. I hope you enjoy the service as much as he enjoyed putting it together. So, this is, Grandpa's asked me to welcome you to this service of cheerful and satisfying memories. He always prided himself on never dwelling on the things in his life that didn't work out. He'd say, I'd review what went wrong, make corrections, and make every effort to mentally anguish about it again. Today we're going to recall some of his achievements, some of his favorite memories, and read some of his last lectures to his grandchildren. We're going to start with a military opening. 2 American flags will lead the escort of the urn to the table of honor here in the front. The American flag will be followed by our Christian flag and then his urn. Gabe will carry in Grandpa's urn and place it on the table of honor. Gabe and Grandpa served in the same infantry division, the 1st Infantry Division. Grandpa served in Korea in 1953 in the 1st Infantry Division, and Gabe served 50 years later in Iraq in the 1st Infantry Division. Next will be the folded American flag that will rest on the table beside his urn. It's our country's tradition that a folded American flag is presented to the family of every military veteran at the time of his death by the President of the United States and a grateful nation. The folded American flag that will be presented to Grandma today was given to Grandpa on his 80th birthday by Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson for his outstanding lifetime of service to country and community. The flag flew over our nation's capital April 18th, 2013, on his 80th birthday. Following Grandpa's folded American flag is our military candle, which we will light during the opening ceremony. Next is his portrait, then the record book, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the program. Next, in escort, is the MIA flag, the Missing in Action flag. The reason for the MIA flag is that Grandpa had 6 buddies captured by the Chinese in the Korean War. They were never heard from again. Grandpa said he wanted never to forget those 6 or the other 9,000 American boys that disappeared and were never heard from again. The MIA flag is in memory of those soldiers. The next flag will be our American Legion flag, followed by our riflemen. And I will say about those 6 friends of his that never came back, 2 or 3 times a year he'd talk about that, and he could read their names off just from memory. It was pretty cool. When the commander calls the squadron to attention, would you all please stand and at his command of hold salute the American flags as they're being carried to the front. When the squad has placed the flags in their respective stands and have given a hand salute, the commander will give the command, order arms, at which time you may remove your hand from your heart and stand at ease. Did you guys all get that? Yeah. So please stand. I'd ask you guys to please stand at this moment. And I will now turn the program over to the Honor Guard commander.
Color guard, post. face. Place the colors. Present. Mark. Order arms. Right face. Forward march. Honor guard. Post. Place. Place colors. Place candle. Place portrait. Place record book. Place Bible. We will now have a candle lighting ceremony. Honor guard dismissed.
We have assembled here to pay a tribute of respect and affection for our departed comrade, Private First Class Charles August Nelson. We light this candle in memory of Chuck. He defended our country under arms. With the help of God, he offered his life to keep America free for you and me, so we truly can be called one nation under God. The light from the flame of the candle shines on the flag and this urn, reminds us that Old Glory will always shine brightly because of veterans like Private First Class Nelson who have served to preserve it. We are proud of the love and devotion that Chuck Nelson gave to our devoted country as a veteran and as a civilian. Now we're going to recite the Lord's Prayer. It's in your bulletin together. On cover, please, gentlemen. And let us pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. May cover.
You may be seated. This was my grandfather's request. Grandpa had asked that his funeral be a gathering of his grandchildren, family, and friends to reminisce and recall some of Grandpa's most meaningful experiences and observations. Grandpa's funeral will definitely be different. The memories that will be shared here today at his funeral will be those thoughts, recollections, remembrances, and life experiences that he wanted to pass on to his grandchildren. So please sit back and enjoy.
Charles August Nelson, age 88, of Barron, Wisconsin, died on June 16th, 2021. Grandpa Chuck made the world a better place, lived life as full as anyone could, and passed while napping in his favorite chair, after completing his chores, of course. Chuck was born in a small farmhouse 3.5 miles north of Poskin, Wisconsin, on April 18th, 1933, to Carl and Mildred Meisigar Nelson. He and his parents moved a year later to Lafayette, New Jersey. He attended school there through the 7th grade. Chuck, his sister Carol Jean, and their parents returned to Barron, Wisconsin in June of 1946. He attended 8th grade at the Pine Grove School, located 3 miles northeast of Poskin. The following year, he attended high school in Barron, graduating in 1951. While in high school, he lettered in football, basketball, and track. He was class president on the debate team, student council president in his sophomore, junior, and senior years, played tenor sax in the band and orchestra, and was a member of the FFA. Chuck was selected Wisconsin FFA Star Farmer in 1951. He was selected to attend Badger Boys State and spoke at his class graduation and played the father in the class play Cheaper by the Dozen. He was active in 4-H, showing dairy cattle at local and state fairs. Chuck was a member of the 4-man team that displayed the Barron County Registered Holstein show herd at state and national shows from 1948 to 1952. Chuck was drafted into the U.S. Army during the Korean War. 32 of his 87 classmates in the class of 1951 served. One classmate, John Thorne, was killed, and one returned a 4-star general, Charles McDonald. Chuck was an instructor in the 1st Infantry Division Communications School in Kansas. He could still transmit Morse code when he was 88 years old. Chuck married his high school sweetheart, Charlotte Nelson, on July 18th, 1953. They had 2 daughters, Karen and Kathleen. Their son, Stephen Charles, died at birth. After his discharge from the Army, Chuck was employed by the Jerome turkey industry for 28 years. 15 years as manager of the breeder division, and 11 years as director of research and development. Some of his fondest memories and achievements were pioneering research in successfully adding fat to the turkey feed ration to bring about higher weight gains, eradicating the respiratory and MS disease from the turkey flocks by perfecting a vacuum process to add an antibiotic to the hatching eggs, and managing the world's largest turkey pedigree program, 400 pens with 10 hens per pen, equaling 4,000 hens, which produced the fastest growing feed-efficient turkey in the industry. Chuck headed up the Jerome team that won the National Live Heavy Turkey Contest for 7 consecutive years. Chuck was selected to North American Avian Geneticist of the Year in 1968. After leaving Jerome's, Chuck was a salesman for A.O. Smith Harvesters for 3 years and a loan officer for U.S. Farm and Home Administration for 2 years. Following that, he worked with his daughter, son-in-law, and eventually grandson in the family wood shavings business until 2015. Chuck adopted his relationship with Jesus in 1961, and from that time forward, believed that Jesus was by his side every day, all day. He went to church not to see Jesus, but to be with Jesus to see his friends. He attended Barron United Methodist Church and was active in many committees in the early years.
Chuck was a lifelong member of the Barron Masonic Lodge and the Indian Head Shrine Club. He was also a member of the Barron Farm Bureau, director for 12 years, the Barron County Fair Association Board of Directors, president of the Barron County 4-H Leaders Association, director of the Wisconsin 4-H Foundation, and a certified Wisconsin County Fair judge for small animals, dogs, and poultry. Chuck was active in the County 4-H Dog Project for 15 years. With his family, he bred and showed registered Suffolk sheep, showing the championship ewe at the Minnesota and Wisconsin state fairs. Chuck won the rate of gain contest for ram lambs at the University of Wisconsin-Arlington Experimental Station 2 consecutive years. He also served as state president of the Wisconsin Suffolk Association and president of the Wisconsin Sheep Breeders Association. He and Charlotte were selected as Wisconsin Shepherds of the Year in 1967. A few other highlights. Chuck obtained a private pilot's license and flew a 172 Cessna and was president of the Barron Flying Club. He always enjoyed reminiscing about some of his exciting flying experiences. Chuck and Charlotte were recognized in 2007 for their many years of support to the Barron County Fair. In 2010, Chuck was recognized by the Barron Ecumenical Men's Club, receiving the Man of the Year award for his lifelong support of community projects. In 2013, Senator Ron Johnson presented him with an American flag that flew over our nation's capital on April 18th, Chuck's 80th birthday, for services to his community, state, and nation. He was also very proud of his involvement in the American Legion Brown Selvig Post number 212. In 2016, Chuck was selected Parade Marshal of the Barron Fall Fest in recognition of his community service. Chuck and Charlotte were also great supporters of the Barron Chautauqua Hockey Association and were honored when the lobby of the new Barron Ice Arena was dedicated to them. On May 12, 2018, he was thrilled to take part in a Freedom Honor Flight to Washington, D.C. for his military contribution during the Korean War. Above all else, Chuck was most grateful for his family. In his own words, 2 daughters you can't beat, and 6 grandchildren, everyone fantastic. I just smile when I think about them. That is what I'm most pleased about. I'm so proud. Chuck is survived by his wife of 68 years, Charlotte, daughters Karen and Robert Schaff of Barron, Kathy and Kevin Splett of Elmina, sister Carol Jean and Dwayne Hegna of Baraboo, Wisconsin, 6 grandchildren, Christian Schaff of Park City, Utah, Gabriel and Katie Schaff of Sussex, Wisconsin, Zach and Brooke Schaff of Barron, Jacob and Ashley Schaff of Jordan, Minnesota, Kayla and Jake Saquitney of Maple Grove, Minnesota, and Kelton Splett of Minneapolis, Minnesota, as well as great-grandchildren Greta, Gracie, Charlie, Hutton, Carter, and Mallory, as well as goddaughter Alicia Worth of Ridgeland, and many other relatives and friends, he is preceded in death by his parents and infant son Stephen.
Our scripture for this service of celebration comes from 2 Timothy in the 4th chapter, verses 7 and 8. Two verses that had an overwhelming impact as we look back on Chuck's life and as we look forward on our own. Paul is writing to a very close friend and a fellow apostle, Timothy, as he sits in prison awaiting trial for his eventual death by Nero, the emperor at the time. He is encouraging Timothy, and he encourages all of us in these two verses to hold on to the faith no matter what. Can't you just hear Chuck saying that? Hold on. Don't give up. From 2 Timothy, the 4th chapter, verses 7 and 8. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. From now on, there is reserved for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give me on that day, and not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing. God's word to us this day. I invite you to turn to number 378 in the hymnal found in the pew as we sing the 1st, the 4th, and the 5th verses of Amazing Grace.
Good morning. I'm Larry Jerome, and I have the privilege of being a very special friend and having a very special friend who was most of the time a really nice guy, but he sometimes liked to badger me a little bit. Today I'm going to talk about relationships, and a very special relationship that revolved around a deck of cards and its players. Now, one of the first things that I told Chuck when we were playing cards, and he would always start dealing out the cards, and then he would want to start playing, and then Charlotte would say, "Would you please let me look at my cards before we start?" So, and then I would repeat to him, "This is not a timed event." And today is not going to be a timed event. I know we all have allotted times, but we may exceed those a little bit. But I was raised just southeast of Barron in my home of my parents, where they built on the site of the original Barron County Poor Farm. My father had purchased this farm, and thus began his dream of feathers. Our closest neighbors were my grandparents, Lawrence and Ella Estenson, and Chuck and Charlotte Nelson. They shared a duplex on the original Barron County Poor Farm. I had incredible loving parents and perfect grandparents. Chuck worked for my dad, primarily in the breeder division, hatchery division of Badger turkey industry, which later became Jerome Foods. My parents, grandparents, and the Nelsons were all raised as farmers. This was something I aspired to be from that time when I could make putt-putt sounds with my toy tractor. I would say when I was about 10 years old when the Nelsons moved in, Chuck, Charlotte, Karen, and Kathy. As time went on, we were constantly together. I had a remodeled hog barn that housed my 4-H animals. It was located on the same property as the Nelsons' home and my grandparents. Karen and Kathy spent hours in the little barn with the kittens, the calves, and the horses. My sisters also spent time in that barn, Sister Julie especially, good friend of Karen and Kathy's. Entrances to the two homes were side by side, and kids and parents walked freely in and out of one another's houses. Nobody knocked at the door. People just walked in and said, "I'm here." As we all grew up, there were border collies, calves became cows, and my passion for farming grew as well. I started milking by hand in 1963 in that remodeled barn, put in real stalls, 6 at the first time and 11. I had an old pickup truck and bought my first car from Chuck. It was a 1958 Studebaker. It belonged to Charlotte's parents, and I paid $10 for it. Had a lot of good times in that car. And so I had the almost perfect childhood. While in college, I spotted the perfect girl walking down the street. I had a hint who she was, as I sang with her sister in musicals and competitions. I was also at this time going to school at Barron County campus. There was a college dance on Saturday. I wanted to take Shelley, who I had never really met yet, to the dance, and I wasn't sure she would go. Of course, there was another side story because I had to get rid of her previous boyfriend first. But I asked her to go out. She broke up with him, so I asked her if she could go out with me on a Tuesday night, which was a school night, which was pretty much forbidden at that time. I had to milk cows, but I knew her parents would probably not allow her to go out. If we did, it would have to be an early date. Shelley got permission, but I was not going to be ready by 6:30 in the evening, so Chuck Nelson finished my chores, and thus began the next chapter. Shortly thereafter, Chuck and Charlotte moved to their current home, and the card-playing tradition began. It started in 1968. I have calculated that because typically we played one night a week, Wednesday nights were reserved for Chuck and Charlotte, and all of the rest of our friends knew that you don't do that. It was choir practice first and cards later. So it wasn't really an option to do that. But anyway, Shelley accepted my offer, and we had gone to the college dance, and our relationship grew with the Nelsons. To this day, I think my relatives and the Nelsons liked her better than me. She was and is the perfect girl. I had done my genetic research as prompted by both my father and Chuck. Values of which are most important in building a family relationship. After all, I knew the excitement that my dad shared when Chuck joined the team. He came from good genetics, hardworking German people. My father had a tendency to keep Chuck up all night working on pedigrees, to the point that my mother, after midnight, would go into the den and tell Chuck to go home. Wallace does not have any common sense, but you should have. Chuck was brought up with the same passion for excellence. At the time that we set our wedding date, it was July 18th, her father's birthday, but is also the same date as Chuck and Charlotte Nelson. Chuck and Charlotte were involved in every family activity. They are the godparents to Alicia, our middle daughter. I have a grandson. He's my favorite grandson, named Adam. His middle name is Charles. Our families were constantly intertwined. Alicia was in Karen and Bob's wedding, and I am honored to be Jacob's godfather. From the beginning until last Wednesday, when our day of transition arrived, Chuck and Charlotte have been constant in our life. There were always events, every wedding, every baptism for the Jerome kids, Mother's Day, Father's Day. I mentioned Chuck's brilliance. Did you know that he actually had encounters with Albert Einstein? He went to visit him a couple of times. Grandkids know that, but that's why he was so sharp, or he thought. Chuck was pretty sharp, but he wasn't real sharp when it came to surprises. He had a 25th wedding anniversary that he arrived at, that he thought that nothing was going on, but it was a surprise thing for him. We had a 50th birthday party for Charlotte. We had a 50th birthday party for Chuck. For his 80th birthday party, we hid all of the grandkids in our bathroom. He thought he was going to in there to fix the plumbing. Surprise. You'd think he would catch on. The night of his 50th birthday, we said, could we take you out, Chuck? So yeah, we went to Pokegama. So on the way home, he says, I bought supper. He says, at least let me buy an after-dinner drink. I says, fine, where do you want to go? He said, well, we're probably going back to play cards. He says, so let's just stop at Tom's. Well, he fell right into that. Because while we were going out to eat, our band was setting up at Tom's and everything, and the place was packed. And he says, let me run in and I'll see if there's any room in there. So he walked right into that. Some of the highlights of our life. When you're young, everything is perfect. When you get older, life is not always the way you thought it would be. There are health issues, there are financial issues, there are family issues. I have experienced all of them, to the point that at one point I questioned the value of my life. As we age and life changes, so do our friends. Chuck and Charlotte were always there for us. No questions asked. There are many who will share in your joy, but few who will share in your pain. Many will desert you, but Chuck always stood by me and supported me. One of my favorite quotes is from Danny Thomas. Success has nothing to do with what you accomplish for yourself. It's what you do for others. I think Chuck was one of the most successful people that I know. He dedicated his life to serving his fellow man. I want to close this portion by saying that you learn a lot about playing cards. Our games required certain ingredients. You will know that Chuck had saintly qualities, but in cards he was quite different. In the evening of card playing, there are certain preparations. You have to put the coasters on the table. Chuck has to get the glasses out of the cupboard. He has to fill them with ice. You have to have the cards, you have to have the scorebook, and you have to use his pen. I think it had erasable ink in it or something. You need squirt and you need buttered popcorn. As I said, Wednesday night was church night, so Charlotte and I started out with choir practice, and then we went to card playing. There's 52 cards in a deck of cards. There are 52 weeks in a year. A deck of cards doesn't last for either, and neither does your life. It's about fair play, don't cheat, and enjoy life. There are rules, and there are rewards, and there are penalties. Because of Chuck, we had to impose a 50-point penalty. Because he would constantly have too many cards. He'd be dropping something on the card, or he'd be signaling to Shelley what was going on. Popcorn is a seed. You plant them, or you can pop them and you eat them. Some will be great. Some will get stuck in your teeth and irritate you. And there will be old maids that amount to nothing. Such is your life. The salt is the seasoning of your life, but there's a point at which there's too much and too little. Squirt is tangy and sour, but it never quenches your thirst. You have to rely on the water of life, the spirit of life, the spirit of Christianity. Chocolate is your reward. There's sweetness that comes with being with the people that you love. And finally, we have the scorebook. Now, I hate to say, but that was something that we had to impose a number of years ago. There's, I don't know, probably about 10 or 15 volumes of it. And that was because the one ingredient that I mentioned, that I didn't mention to you, is that you always have to have the cell phone when you play cards. The purpose of the cell phone is that at the end of the game, you either call any one of the grandsons or granddaughter, or you call Jeff and say, "We won." But we have documents to prove otherwise. I estimate that over our time, we have played approximately 55,000 games of cards. It wasn't just Wednesday night, it got to be any night. You call Chuck, "Jerome wants to know if you want to play cards," is what he'd holler at Charlotte. Sure, they'd be right over. I also want to say that Chuck was my chauffeur. Many times he took me to the airport, picked me up when I took my trips. So those were his times of sharing his life with me. We are creatures of habit. We don't like to vary from those things. Chuck's belief was that you stay the course and you don't veer. He loved his wife. He could never say enough about his grandkids. But the one thing he didn't do is he didn't talk about himself in a boastful way. I'd like to leave you with this last reading, which I think describes Chuck to a T. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not boast. It is not proud. It is not rude. It is not self-seeking. It is not angered. It keeps no records of wrongs, unless we play cards. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices in the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always preserves. 1 Corinthians 13. I'm going to miss my best friend.
This memory is entitled Disappointments. You grandchildren are going to experience many disappointments during your lifetime. Here's my advice or thoughts on that subject. Number 1, it is important that you learn to bounce back from disappointments. You'll learn from those disappointments, evaluate what went wrong, and then make changes so that hopefully next time it won't happen again. Number 2, be realistic. Are you setting your goals too high, expecting too much? If you have a goal that's important enough to you, a few disappointments along the way won't deter you. Number 3, above all, grandchildren, when a disappointment does occur, don't let it show. Learn to handle your emotions like a poker player. When the going gets tough and you've had a disappointment, accept it gracefully. Force a smile, offer a handshake or a congratulatory comment to the winner if appropriate. Number 4, I would recommend not sharing your disappointments. Regrettably, very, very few friends really care about your disappointments, so you'll find it's a waste of time to share them. The only benefit in sharing your disappointments with someone is psychological. It'll help you mentally bounce back faster if you can talk to someone who cares. The only two that I could trust and who really cared were my mother and God. Number 5, it's easier to accept disappointments than to forget them. Some disappointments you'll remember for life. I remember the disappointment when I was 12 years old and in 7th grade. Our Lafayette school was putting on the annual spring play, and a boy in 8th grade had the lead role but was having trouble learning the lines. Mr. Cross, the principal, asked me if I could memorize the part. I did, and I got the part. I was very proud and excited and anxious for my mom and dad to see the play. I still remember the night we put the play on, standing behind the curtain before the play started, peeking out at the audience looking for my mom and dad. I saw my mom, but no dad. Darn. I always worked hard to win my dad's praise, so I wanted him to be proud of me. I was so disappointed. Later, when my dad apologized for not being there because of work, I lied and assured him that it was A-okay. I experienced that same type of disappointment in my senior year. In my high school graduation, I gave the address for the class of 1951. I thought I had a pretty good speech, but my dad wasn't there to hear me. He had a dairy price stabilization meeting that night. Again, I lied and assured him that I understood and it was a-okay. Another disappointment that I had never forgotten was that my dad I almost made it. He watched me only play one football game in my high school career. I lettered 4 years. I played first string and on defense and offense for 3 years. My dad wouldn't have seen that one game if a neighbor hadn't picked him up and took him to that game. I loved each and every one of you grandchildren, and reflecting on the disappointments I felt when my dad was not at the plays or games when I was growing up made me make a commitment to myself to try and be at most of the events you were in. And Grandma and Grandpa really were at every event. It means so much to share one's achievements with someone you love. And I loved you all. I love that line Chris read. He went to church not to see Jesus, but with Jesus to see his friends. It's cool. He's standing right here, Gabe. My tab is incorrect, Grandpa. Relationship with God. My relationship with God took on a whole new and different concept in the early 60s. I was about 28. When I was a baby, I was baptized. In youth, I went to Sunday school every week, vacation Bible school in the summer. My mom was the Sunday school superintendent. Learned the 10 Commandments, sang in the choir, was confirmed, became a member of the church, and served on all the church committees. When Karen and Kathy came along, I helped them with their bedtime prayers. I just accepted the Christian way of life. Go to church on Sunday with my family, pray to the appropriate times, believe that if I practiced those 10 Commandments, the best that I could, I was doing what was expected. The best that I could do was doing what was expected. That concept took on a whole new meaning when Mel Jensen came into my office one afternoon in the 60s and asked, "Nelson, are you the man responsible for switching license plates on our turkey trucks?" Mel was a plant engineer. He was a very, very sharp individual. He could calculate how much antibiotics at 12 inches of vacuum could be absorbed through the shell of a turkey egg in 25 minutes. He was continuously designing new changes in our EVIS line that made us the most efficient processing plant in the industry. I had the utmost respect for his capabilities. He is also given credit, along with his wife, for being one of the founders of the Barron County Historical Museum over in Cameron. I had many responsibilities working for Wally Jerome, and one of them was to take care of licensing our semi-trucks every quarter. We had a large fleet of trucks that were used just to haul the live turkeys to the plant. At that time, we only ran 6 months out of the year, so many of the trucks sat idle for 6 months. As we slowly adapted to year-round growing, we started processing more, and so the number of trucks we needed each quarter changed. I also was in charge of publishing the projected turkey processing schedule for the foreseeable future, so I knew better than anyone when we would need trucks and how many trucks we'd need. It was natural then that I was to take care of licensing the trucks at the appropriate time. Regulations at that time were that you could not transfer a license from one truck to another during that period. If you traded an old truck in on a new one, you had to buy a new license for that truck. The previous day, Mel had seen a wrecker pulling one of our trucks into the shop.
He noticed the license plate number 006. The next day, he saw a different turkey truck with the same license plate, 006. Mel then asked the repair shop foreman, Norm Wiegand, how that license plate got switched. Mel asked Norm if he was aware that it was illegal, but Norm told him he knew nothing about it but to see me. So here stands Mel demanding some answers. In authoritative tone that expressed much disgust. He wanted to know if I knew what I was doing was illegal and that we could be assessed a fine. I countered that the law needed changing, that we had paid a license to operate a vehicle on the highway for 90 days, and it should be allowed to transfer that license to an unlicensed truck. I reminded Mel that our company was very short on cash. Niles Ellefson, our CEO, was trying to figure out where the money for next week's payroll would be coming from. We didn't have the money to buy a new license. I don't remember what it cost back in the 60s, but currently it's about $1,200 a quarter. Mel countered that if our company was fined for doing something illegal, it would give a bad image in our community and be a bad example for our employees. I told Mel we'd never get caught. Nobody cares or notices as long as the truck has a current plate. I told Mel that no one would take the time to check the VIN and compare them. I had switched the plates late at night or early in the morning when no one was around. I said, nobody knows. You're the only one who's ever noticed. It's just you and I that know. We were still standing, facing each other, eye to eye, and Mel responded, "You're wrong, Nelson. There's a guy standing right here with us right now." And he pointed down at the floor at the spot between us. I still remember him being so excited in his pointing that I actually looked down to where he had pointed. Mel continued, "And he knows." At that point, he raised his hand and poked me in the chest 4 times with his finger. I can still feel it poking me in the chest as he said each word. He knows, and he doesn't like it. Mel turned, walked out of the office, leaving the door open. I stood there, still feeling the sensation in my chest where he'd poked me, hearing those words, and he doesn't like it. No more was ever said to me about that day. But Jesus has never left my side since that day. When I lose my patience with someone and I'm about to say something in a critical way, Jesus is there. If I'm doing invoices and it'd be easy to move a decimal point and no one would ever know, Jesus is there and he knows. What a change that event made on my life.
This memory is my relationship with God. I wanted to help each one of you, my grandchildren, develop your own personal relationship with God. It's my desire that God would be an active part of your life every day, not just on Sunday mornings. By trying to explain to you how I, over the last 70 years, had developed my relationship with God, you'll be aware of other options in putting together your own relationship with God. I had heard many ministers talk from the pulpit about the part that Jesus should play in our lives and why. They all seem to have different approaches and different explanations. It all seems so complicated, so involved, so confusing. My relationship with God was very simple. God gave me his 10 commandments to guide my actions, guide my thoughts in what I say or do during every waking moment of my day. When I complied with God's wishes, I had a feeling of pleasure. When I didn't comply, I had an immediate feeling of remorse, guilt, pain, pleasure versus pain. That's a simple enough reason to comply with most regulations that we're confronted with. So how did I develop this automatic sensory system that immediately sends out pleasure sensations when I obeyed one of God's commandments and pain sensations when I didn't? You might say I went through 4 different stages or experiences in my lifetime to develop the relationship that I later had with God. The first stage was when my sister, Carol Jean, and I were little. When my dad said no, my sister and I always obeyed. My dad didn't have to shout the command. It was his tone of voice, sincere, gentle, but very firm sounding. My dad's success in training us to obey came about because my sister and I, at a very young age, found out that when my dad said no and we didn't immediately comply, we got a firm swat on our butt. When my dad said no and we complied, we got a smile and or a compliment. There was nothing better than, after obeying, having my dad come and give us a hug and tell us how proud he was. I had benefited from that philosophy lesson, pain versus pleasure, my whole life. I credited my success in training cattle, dogs, and working with people, and my relationship with God to understanding and adopting the principles of that lesson, pain versus pleasure. I learned that a lot during dog training as well. He constantly said, pain versus pleasure. The second stage, the same as you, was getting to know God when I was a youngster. This included Sunday school, confirmation, membership in church, serving on committees in church, etc. The third stage was when I was about 28 years old and was my experience with Mel Jensen. He's standing right here. That change in my relationship with God stayed with me until my dad died 20 years later, and that's what Zach just read. The fourth stage in developing my relationship with God came about when I found myself complying with the 10 Commandments for the same reasons that I complied with my dad's commands when I was a little boy. I called those reasons pain or pleasure. My dad died when I was about 48 years old. He, more than anyone else, taught me as a youngster the pain that comes from doing something wrong and the pleasure when something is done right. My relationship with God was the same as I had with my dad, pain or pleasure. Out of respect and love when I was a little boy, I always tried to please my dad. When I failed, he swatted me. When I succeeded, he praised me. Having my dad come up to me after some activity and lay his hand on my shoulder and say, "Well done, son," would be the high point of that event. The fantastic feeling I had when I did something well and knew my dad would be pleased is hard to explain. The emotional pain I've experienced after I did something that I knew my dad would not have been proud of would stick with me for some time afterward. God gave me the 10 Commandments to guide my life. The Masonic Lodge, of which I was a member, had added some details to those commandments. For example, do not cheat, wrong, or defraud another man, nor supplant him in any of his unlawful undertakings, but give him warning in case of approaching danger. Another one is, I will not strike another man except in defense of my family, myself, or my country. God has stood by my side every moment of every day. When I followed those commands, I knew he was pleased, and that gave me great pleasure. When I didn't follow those commands, I didn't wait until the next time communion was served in church to talk to God about my failure. I talked to God right then. He knew about my transgressions because he was standing right next to me as I disobeyed his commandments. So you see, I had transferred that relationship I had with my dad to Jesus. Before my dad died, when I did something I knew my dad would approve of, I would really feel good inside. After my dad passed away, however, I did something admirable. I sensed the smile on Jesus' face. I sensed the feeling of pleasure that God was pleased. I felt that sensation immediately. A few times after my dad died, I had to make some gut-twisting decisions. I drove to Wayside Cemetery in Barron and stopped the old pickup by my dad's stone, shut the pickup off, walked over to the gravestone and pondered my situation and what solution my dad would have thought best. Time has passed. I don't know exactly when it happened, but later in my life, when good things or bad things happened, I did not sense my dad's reaction. I sensed Jesus' reaction. When I blurted out a statement I shouldn't have, I immediately felt shame because I remembered what Mel Johnson told me. He's standing right here, and he doesn't like it. Please join us in singing hymn number 600, Wonderful Words of Life, verses 1 and 3. Stand if you're able.
I thought it'd be worth noting there are 33 sections to this book, so we all picked one. He had some he suggested, but it's funny sitting here how they all dovetail together. So Zach talked about one thing that carried over to Kayla, and this carries over too. I'm gonna try not to cry. This is tough. The success formula for successfully working with cattle, dogs, and people. I did dog training for a while in 4-H, and I remember one day, clear as can be, I was trying to get my German Shepherd to heel with me, and I'd do a 180 and have it stay next to me, and she'd wander off every time I turned. And I can still see Grandpa pulling in the yard and stopping his little black Mazda and going, "Hey, let me show you how to do that." So he came over and petted the dog and cheered it on and started walking and turned the corner, and that dog went off, and he drugged that dog by the back, on its back for about 10 yards. And to the day that dog died, if I said heel, it would slam its head into my leg and not look at anything else. So 1 part pain plus 9 parts love equals a perfect 10. I was a darn good cattle showman. I've never bragged about my cattle showing talent. Remember my admonishment, no one loves a winner. Here's another one. No one likes to hear a winner brag. But you'll excuse me, this is my last chance and last time you'll have to sit and listen to me reminisce and brag about my cattle showing days. In my late teens at state shows and our national dairy show at Waterloo, Iowa, if I wasn't committed to showing an animal from our Barron County show herd, I would sometimes be asked to show for other herds. Pabst, Carnation, Allen Heltz, Henry Bartell. Those were the best herds in the Midwest. It would make me feel really tickled down inside when the herdsman would ask Glenn Craneville, who was in charge of our county show herd, if I could show a particular animal of theirs that they were having in the show ring. After a day of showing, I'd go to sleep at night with a smile on my face. At the annual Barron County Fall Holstein Sale held in the Barron Sales Pavilion, it pleased me that I was one of 3 showmen to be asked to lead animals at the sale, from my sophomore year in high school until I was drafted into the Army. In the summer, I was very good at breaking cattle to lead and show. Before the show season started, I would be asked to train cattle owned by breeders here in Barron County: Bob Kep, Herb Spaney, Bill Barrett, George Schultz, and Harold Burdick. I would charge $10 per head. $10 was a lot of money in 1950. Wages were 75 cents per hour. As a note, I had to do this after getting done working for my dad all day. I could usually train an animal in an evening. Then I would always go back for 2 more sessions over a 10-day period to make sure the animal hadn't forgotten. What was the secret to my success? I call it pain versus pleasure. I'll explain a bit more. I was also very successful at dog training. Our county 4-H dog obedience courses were very successful using the pain versus pleasure technique. Bob Gates, a well-known dog trainer from Minneapolis, credits his success to the pain versus praise technique. Mr. Gates, in a speech at a 4-H banquet, complimented me that I could train a dog in 15 minutes to heel, sit, stay, and come. My secret? Pain versus pleasure. When training animals, my success was determined by how quickly I responded to what they did. You know how fast reflexes are when you accidentally touch a red-hot stove? Your reflexes have to be that fast or faster when using the pain technique for training dogs or cattle, unless you want to just be an average trainer. When training cattle, I used a chain on the jaw strap. With dogs, I used a choke chain. The discomfort or pain the chain caused the animal when under tension can be released very quickly compared to a leather lead strap. Quick, lightning-fast release is very important. In fact, it is key to the success of the style of training. Pain, then immediately, when they comply, no pain. Then immediate pleasure. Soothing strokes with your hand and soothing tone in your voice. Pain versus pleasure. The Humane Society does not like the word pain when describing this method of training, but that word, along with the word pleasure, best describes my method of achieving success in training cattle and dogs, and also working with people. But here's the key to success of this style of training. Ready? 9 times love. Every time you inflict pain, give them 9 times the love. The word good has 8 O's in it. Your hands stroke the animal. You never strike the animal with your hand, never. Your hands were made for love. Use your voice along with the chain to express dissatisfaction, a loud no, simultaneously with a jerk of the chain, and then immediately when they respond favorably, a soft, gentle voice with lots of O's, and a soft, gentle stroke of your hand. Remember 9 times love. When a youngster comes off a basketball court, we talk excitedly 9 times about all the good things they did before you mention one bad thing they did. That's the secret to keeping a young person enthusiastic and excited about any endeavor they are attempting. It's sometimes very tough not to immediately say, "You dumbhead," when you're advising or coaching a young person and they've just screwed up. Talk to them first in an excited and positive tone about all the things in the endeavor that they are attempting that went well. Then spend 10% of your critique on what went wrong. 1 part pain, 9 parts love. Best formula I know for successfully working with cattle, dogs, and people.
The next memory from Grandpa is titled Assume. The dictionary definition of assume: to take for granted with no proof. I want you grandchildren to be aware that there will be times that what you assume doesn't happen. Always be aware in your subconscious, because there will be times when taking for granted will end in disappointment. I have a memory to relate about what happened to a well-known cattle judge, Harvey Swartz, when he assumed. This was an incident that happened in 1950 at the Barron County Fair, where our Barron County show herd crew was helping show George Schutz's Get of Sire in the aged cow class. These 4 cows had been shown by our county show herd crew in 4 previous shows that year and had been selected the previous year as the National Holstein Association's All-American Get of Sire. At each show, each one of the 4 cows had been shown by the same leadsmen: Harley Barfneck, Arlie Wetzel, Chuck Nelson, and Glenn Cranebuell. All 4 cows were obviously outstanding in type, but one was especially good, and Glenn always showed her. At previous shows, she always stood first, and at one show, she was grand champion. The cow that Harley Barfneck always showed had the poorest type of the 4. Harvey Swartz was the judge at this show. He had judged these cows before at a state show. He knew Glenn on a first-name basis and was familiar with these cows. Just before we went into the ring with our animals, I saw Harvey talking to Glenn and admiring the cow that Glenn was leading. As we were leading our cows into the show ring, Glenn hands his lead strap to Harley Barfneck and says, "Here, Harley, let's swap cows. You show the champion this time." Harvey's type of judging this day was to place the bottom cow first and work his way up. He apparently never looked at the cow Glenn was leading, just Glenn. He assumed Glenn was showing the cow he had always shown at all previous shows. He placed each cow one by one until they were all placed except Glenn's. He then looked at Glenn and pointed to the head of the show string. He then pointed to the clerk, signaling that he was done, and walked over to the mic to make his comments. I will never forget what happened next. Harvey Swartz, with the mic in his hand, walks towards his first place cow. Harvey always exhibited a superiority complex. His attire of suit coat, white shirt and tie, business hat, a press in his pants, shiny shoes, and excellent physical carriage. He always looked intently into your eyes when he spoke to you and had a definite, dominant, confident tone in his voice. Harvey looked at his first place cow for the first time. Remembering during the judging, Harvey assumed Glenn was still leading the top show cow, the one he saw Glenn standing with outside the show ring before the class had started. Harvey assumed that Glenn was still leading the same cow that won all the first place ribbons at the previous shows. Regrettably, during the judging of the class, Harvey only looked at Glenn, not Glenn's cow. I can still see the expression on Harvey's face and hear the confused mutterings of words into the mic as he looked at his first place cow. Naturally, Harvey walked over, reevaluated the situation, and placed Glenn and his cow about 2/3 of the way down the line. Those of us who were there have had many good-natured chuckles over a cup of coffee remembering that day. And I hope you grandchildren will remember this story and be cautious whenever you assume. Next, you are like the people you associate with. Grandpa asks, "What kind of person are you?" I like each of you grandchildren just the way you are. Don't change. Each of you in your own way is just great. But as you grow older, you will change. Why? One reason is that you now don't have mom or grandpa to keep nudging you in the direction we had planned for you. But the real reason we change is that we tend to be like the people we associate with or admire. By the same token, if we see someone, shall we say, walking with poor posture, we tend to be more conscious of our own posture. When I met a fellow with his stomach sticking out, I would immediately suck mine in. If you're wondering what kind of person you are, you tend to be like the people you associate with. So I want each of you to keep on associating with the people you currently are. Don't change. I like you just the way you are.
As Chris said, a lot of these stories dovetail into another one, and we thought this was a good way to wrap things up. This is Building Self-Esteem in the Next Generation, a request from Grandpa. I want each of you grandchildren, whenever the opportunity arises, to help build self-esteem in the next generation. So many of our young people, for a variety of reasons, have an I don't count, no one cares about me, or why even try syndrome. It's so important that when we older people can, we recognize youngsters and let them know that they're noticed. They are important. I really believe there were incidents when I was young that an older person I respected took the time to recognize me, and in doing so, helped boost my self-esteem. By relating a couple incidents, I'm hopeful you'll see the reason I'm asking you, whenever the opportunity presents itself, to help build self-esteem in our next generation. The first self-esteem incident was my meeting Albert Einstein. I met Dr. Einstein twice at Princeton University when I was in the 7th grade. Our pastor, who wasn't ordained yet, was still going to school. The war was just over, but there was a shortage of ministers, and our pastor was serving the Presbyterian and Methodist churches in Lafayette as an intern. He, I thought later in life, was grooming me for the ministry and took me to class with him on 2 occasions. Our pastor, Reverend McLaughlin, had Dr. Einstein as an instructor and would, after class, go up with other students to the front of the classroom and discuss questions with Dr. Einstein. I can still remember the very large, odd-shaped desk, the blackboard, the American flag standing by the desk, and Professor Einstein's whitish-gray hair. It was very long. All of my heroes were B-24 pilots, and they had crew cuts, so I wasn't very impressed meeting Albert Einstein and his long white hair. This next part of the story is why I will never forget meeting him. The first time Reverend McLaughlin introduced me to Einstein, Einstein shook my hand and asked my name. We were not the only people up on stage. There had to be 8 or 12 others. Perhaps a month or so later, arrangements were made for me to miss a day at my Lafayette school and go with Reverend McLaughlin to class at Princeton. After Einstein's lecture, we went up front and listened as we waited our turn. Dr. Einstein was chatting with a group ahead of us, turned slightly, saw me, interrupted his conversation, extended his hand towards me and said, "Master Charles, good to see you." He shook my hand and then turned back and continued on his conversation with the other group. Wow. I'm sure I walked out of that classroom that day with my shoulders back and my chin a half-inch higher. There I was, 12 years old, standing in a large group of college students, and Dr. Einstein stops his remarks to acknowledge my presence and remember my name. What a boost to my self-esteem. 5 years later, when I was a senior in high school, I had another memorable boost to my self-esteem from my high school math teacher, Art Feline. Our country was at war in Korea. The draft board had been activated, and the Department of Defense was encouraging young men to get all the math they could. Our high school was allowing students to drop a required subject in order to fit in a class of math. I was already taking a class of geometry, but went to Mr. Feline to ask his advice on taking trigonometry and advanced calculus, all at the same time. I was very apprehensive when I went to meet with Mr. Feline, as to what he would say, but wow, I could still remember that feel of pleasure after the meeting when I walked out of Mr. Feline's classroom. His sincere tone of voice, commenting in detail on his recollections of my excellent recall and my memory and work ethic that I had exhibited in the previous year of his math class. He said there was no doubt in his mind that I could do it. Boosting a young person's self-esteem helps formulate their performance for the rest of their lives. Know that, believe that, and try whenever possible to be a part of building self-esteem in the next generation. Don't be shy about interrupting your conversation with others just for a moment to acknowledge the presence of a young person you may know or had previously met. I truly believe these encounters contributed to making me the person I became.
My friends, in the midst of the celebration and in the midst of the memories and in the midst of reliving Chuck's life, I invite us to be in a moment of prayer. God of us all, your love never ends. When all else fails, you still are God. We pray to you for one another in our need and for all anywhere who mourn with us this day. To those who doubt, give light. To those who are weak, strength. To all who have sinned, mercy. To all who sorrow, your peace. Oh God, all that you have given us is yours. As first you gave Charles August Nelson to us, now we give him back to you. Receive Chuck into the arms of your mercy. Raise him up with all your people. For it is into your hands, O merciful Savior, that we commend your servant Charles. Acknowledge, we humbly beseech you, a sheep of your own fold, a lamb of your own flock, a sinner of your own redeeming. Receive Chuck into the arms of your mercy, into the blessed rest of everlasting peace, and into the glorious company of the saints of light. Amen. Safe in the arms of Jesus.
As we lay you to rest, as we say our goodbyes, we think of what a blessing you have been here in our lives. But it's hard to let you go without tears in our eyes. And even though we know that God has called you home, you're safe in the arms of Jesus. So we celebrate your life as we're gathered here today. We thank the Lord on high for sending you our way. We treasure the joy you brought us, though we grieve you left so soon. And in our hearts we know that God has called you home. You're safe in the arms of Jesus. Safe in the arms of Jesus. No more pain or sorrow here on earth. A new beginning,
a new rebirth. You are safe in the arms of Jesus. And though our hearts are breaking because we miss you so, through our tears and sadness, our faith lets us know we will be with you again. You just got there first, my friend. And in our faith we know that God has called you home. You're safe in the arms of Jesus. Safe in the arms of Jesus. No more pain or sorrow here on earth. New beginning, a new rebirth. You are safe in the arms of Jesus. Safe in the arms of Jesus. No more pain or sorrow here on earth. A new beginning, a new rebirth. You are safe in the arms of Jesus. You are safe in the arms of Jesus.
As we conclude the funeral program for our grandfather, Grandpa wanted to explain some of the meanings of the closing ceremony of a military funeral. Here's a little bit of the history of taps. The tradition of the firing of 3 volleys and the playing of taps at a military funeral originated at the time of our country's Civil War in 1861. It's hard to believe that in a typical battle, 2 groups of men, maybe 5,000 each, one from the north and one from the south, would stand in an open field, face each other with a distance between them, and maybe 200 yards and on command begin shooting at each other. After a short time, the battlefield would be littered with thousands of wounded, dying, and dead soldiers. A truce would be arranged where the firing would stop and both sides would retrieve their casualties. When the casualties of one group had all been removed from the battlefield, that group would fire 3 rounds in the air to signify that the wounded and dead had been taken care of and they were ready to resume fighting. When the other side had their wounded and dead retrieved from the battlefield, they would also signal with a firing of 3 rounds that they too were ready to resume the battle. The playing of taps came about because the high number of burials after each battle. It was tradition to have music at a burial, but because of the unusual circumstances of high numbers of dead during a short period of time, the company bugler would play 8 mournful phrases for each burial. These are the words to those 8 phrases. Day is done. Job well done. We're so proud. Rest in peace. You can sleep. God is pleased. You're going home. You're at rest.
At the order of the Honor Guard commander, the Color Guard will unfold Grandpa's flag and display it by his urn. The flag flew over our nation's capital in Washington, D.C. on April 18th, 2013, Grandpa's 80th birthday. It was given to Grandpa by Senator Ron Johnson for his lifetime of service to his country and his community. When the flag is unfolded, Gabe will lead us in the reciting of the 23rd Psalm, and then taps will be played. The flag will then be refolded and presented to Grandma. The Legion commander will then instruct the rifle squad to proceed. The Legion firing squad will fire their weapons 3 times. The firing of their rifles into the sky 3 times is to signify that Grandpa's life is over and he has gone home to be with God, and that the rest of us are ready to go on with our lives. We will now have the flag presentation, and when the honor guard is called to attention, please also rise.
Honor guard, attention. Honor guard, post.
Will you please join me in the 23rd Psalm? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
Present arms.
This concludes the funeral service for Grandpa. He asked me to read this as we depart. I want to thank each of you for coming and sharing in the good memories of the good times and experiences of my life. But now you, each of you, has heard the rifles fire 3 times. This means that you must go. Go like our Civil War ancestors and continue your battle. Continue your struggle to achieve your dreams, your goals, and know that Jesus is standing there by your side every minute of every day, as he has for me. And if Jesus will let me, I'll be standing there too, by your side. On behalf of the family, thank you so much for being a part of this day and being a part of our grandpa's life. There is lunch in the basement following. Thank you. Following the lunch, we will be headed to the cemetery for a small graveside service. Anybody who wants to attend, you are more than invited, and we'll make an announcement before we go.
Color guard post. Color guard left face. Present arms. Retrieve colors. Color guard right face. Forward march. Order arms.
Assurance as the family leaves the celebration to continue celebrating.